Good morning, church. That woke you up, didn't it? Got you wide awake now. You know, it's easy to look around, and especially if you're anything like me, it's really easy to look around and to dwell on the negative. But you know, something I've come to realize is that the God on the mountain is still the God in the valley, and for that I am forever thankful. You know, from the very, very beginning of time, God has felt a certain way about children. God has always been very fond of children, and it's a really cool thought as you look through the Bible and as you see the way God talks about little kids, about children. I know that for me, the idea of children just absolutely melts my heart, their innocence, and as we're talking about today, their purity. And you know, it's interesting, more often than not, really, the sermons that you'll hear relating to children are sermons designed to explain how we should be the example for children, and how men step up and be men and be the examples for your young men, for your sons, for your grandsons, and that type of thing. And for our ladies to step up and be the examples for your daughters and for your granddaughters, nieces, whatever it is. But what's really cool about today is that it's the very opposite of that. Rather than talk about how we should step up and be the example for them and try to walk in such a way that they will follow us. And rather than talking about it that way, it's really cool to flip it around and talk about all the things that children do and all the things that children are that you and I should imitate. And there are things about children. There are just certain things about them, certain things they do, certain things that they are that you and I, again, should imitate. I want to share with you my mom's favorite verse in all of the Bible. In Mark chapter 10, starting in verse 13, it says, "And they were bringing children to him so that he would touch them, but the disciples rebuked them. But when Jesus saw this, he was indignant and said to them, 'Allow the children to come to me. Do not forbid them, for the kingdom of God belongs to such as these.'" Again, that's my mom's very favorite verse for obvious reasons. And then look with me in Matthew chapter 18. In Matthew chapter 18, he takes it a step further. In Matthew chapter 18 and verse 1, it says this. It says, "At that time, the disciples came to Jesus and said, 'Who then is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?' And he called a child to himself and set him among them and said, 'Truly I say to you, unless you change and become like children, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven. So whoever will humble himself like this child, he is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven.'" That pretty much sums it up, doesn't it? Not only does God feel a very special feeling for children and feel a certain way about children, in fact, the Lord Jesus said, unless you become like children, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven. As we've mentioned, from the very beginning of time, God has felt a certain way. And as we've already mentioned, typically we talk about how we can be the example for them, and that would be appropriate, would it not? It would be appropriate. Somewhere along the way, there's been a disconnect, and kids are disconnected from the church in so many ways, unfortunately. And I don't know, I don't like to play the blame game, so I won't play the blame game. But somewhere along the line, somebody slipped up, and we have a generation of kids who have been raised up, and unfortunately, they're not really seeming to be that interested in living by faith. More so living by fear or living by whatever culture and society defines as the way they should live. But again, that is not the lesson. The lesson is this. You and I, we're going to look at 4 characteristics of children that you and I should imitate this morning. The first one of them being their heart. My goodness, when you look at the heart of a child, what do you think about? Well, you think about some of those words we've already mentioned, right? You think about purity. You think about innocent. Some of you parents are sitting there saying, "No way is my kid pure and innocent, is a little monster." But you know what I mean. You know that at the heart of every child is purity. And at the heart of every child is innocence. And some of you will relate to this on a really personal level because you've gotten to see it unfold even more so than I am. In today's day and age, okay, and the day and age that you and I live in, purity and innocence is not exactly something that's being promoted by culture, right, and society. As a matter of fact, it's the exact opposite of that. What you're seeing on TV and what you're hearing on the radio and what's being broadcast out there as entertainment is anything but pure and innocent. The world that we live in is telling us that we should pursue whatever it is that makes us happy, no matter what that looks like, to tell whatever kind of joke that we think is funny, no matter how inappropriate, to laugh at children when they cuss and say things like Daddy would say when he stumps his toe or something like that. That's what society says is good, rather than going back to, again, what a child is, pure and innocent. In Psalm 51 and verse 10, in the aftermath of his sin with Bathsheba, David has this to say. It says, "Create in me a clean heart, God, and renew a steadfast spirit within me." Some of you recognize that as a song that we sing fairly often, "Create in me a clean heart." You know, something that the church has done that really is exactly the opposite of what should be done, myself included. I just mean something that we've been teaching that we need to be really careful about is we pound that all of us should learn what it is to change our actions. For a long, long time now, you'll hear sermons specifically, and even classes sometimes, and they're all designed with this idea of you've got to learn to change your action. I would say it's the very opposite of that. Because where do actions come from? It actually, what you do comes from within your heart, right? So rather than approaching it like, brethren, we should change our action, we should do something differently, why don't we say this? Why don't we learn to clean up our heart? Because this is a promise, okay? If you clean up your heart, your actions will follow. Right? Do you see that? Do you see that if you change what's on the inside, the outside will change too? Now, some of you are saying, well, Chase, that's easier said than done. How do I change my heart? Well, first of all, you don't. Okay, God does. But I can give you a pretty good place to start. Brethren, you will put out what you are taking in. I have come to realize that this is absolutely true. I've heard it all of my life, and it is absolutely true. If garbage comes in, then garbage will come out. Amen? If you're listening to whatever that type of music is that is garbage, and you're putting garbage in all the time, even, here's a really scary one, even the people you surround yourself with, if garbage is going in, garbage will come out. Okay? One way or another. That's just how it goes. I can relate to David on a very personal level whenever he says, "Create in me a clean heart," because I can think of a time in my life where my heart was anything but clean. To where my mind was anything but clean, that the thoughts and the intentions and the desires as they swelled up within me, that I was anything but clean. And maybe some of you are saying the very same thing. What you feel about other people even in your mind and how you feel about people in your heart. Or what it is that you're allowing yourself to hear and to see. I mean, you ever get that feeling like the world has just got you in such a bad, yucky place that it's miserable, and then you come to church and it all seems to go away because you leave uplifted and you feel so much better? Do you know why that is? Because for this time, for this small amount of time, everything that the world says is good is gone. Everything that's being promoted and pushed on you is gone. We're thinking about the spiritual. We're thinking about things that are more important, right? We're hearing what God's Word has to say about life and not what society says about life. We're singing songs. We're encouraging. We're building up when society says it's more about tearing down. So you get to that point where the world is just doing a number on you. I can remember one time where I decided, you know what, for 30 days I'm going to listen to nothing but Christian type music, but what is labeled as Christian music. I'm not going to watch television shows that are anything but Christian based. I'm going to listen to, different Christian podcasts and, whatever. And I said for this 30-day period, I'm just going to absolutely let myself be built up entirely. And for some of you are thinking, well, that's not really appealing to me. Well, here's what I found. I found that during that time, my mind was where it needed to be so much more than it was before. I found that God was on my mind when I was waking up in the morning. I found that my God was on my mind when I went to bed that night. I found that my life before I knew it was centered entirely, for the first time perhaps, around Jesus, because that is what I was thinking about. And my actions, I was finding myself, I was more apt to go and to just do something for someone. Because again, if garbage comes in and garbage goes out, then what is to say if you're putting good in? Good will come out. I love the heart of children, their purity, their innocence, and I love the idea that God says you can become the very same thing. In our reality, Jesus is after your heart more than anything else, because think about this. You can do the right things all the wrong ways. I don't know if you realize that or not. You can do the right thing the wrong way. You can do this checklist Christianity thing for the rest of your life. And maybe you think that works for you. Well, I went to church this week, check. Okay, I said my prayer before my meals, check. And we can go about life that way. But brethren, may I ask, if that is where we're at, and if that is the way that we're living, does He really have my heart? Because that's what He's after. In Matthew chapter 22, in verses 35 through 37, what does it tell us? It tells us to love the Lord our God with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength. Give me the heart of a child. Also, another really cool attribute about children is their excitedness, okay? You don't have to teach them how to get excited about something. They get excited about things really, really easily. And sometimes the simplest, maybe even the dumbest of things is something that will get them excited. Cody Roberts said in a class here a few weeks ago, he says you buy them a really expensive toy and they want to play with the box it came in. And I was like, that's so true, right? They get excited about a box of all things. I can remember when I would have boxes as a kid, and I would stack them up in different places, and I would open the ends of them up so I could build myself a big old cardboard box castle or fort in my house, and I thought that was the neatest thing ever, right? And we get excited about stuff. Don't you look at me like that. Y'all did that too. I see the look in your eyes. You did it too. Stop acting like you didn't do that. You know you did that, right? We took boxes, we built forts, we got blankets and threw them over chairs, and we just got excited about stuff like that, didn't we? You don't have to tell a kid to get excited because naturally they're excited. Brethren, you know where I'm going with this, right? For you and I, this thing called discipleship is exciting. And even though we look at a situation where we're thinking, man, it's just not that great and things are not so good, again, never forget that the God on the mountain is still God in the valley, and that He's still living, He's still active, He's still doing things, and we always have a reason to be excited. Go to Romans chapter 12 with me. Romans chapter 12, look with me in verse 10. I really, really like this. I think you will too. It says, be devoted to one another in brotherly love. Give preference to one another in honor. Now notice verse 11. It says, not lagging behind in diligence. Fervent in what? Fervent in spirit, serving the Lord. Rejoicing in hope, persevering in tribulation, devoted to prayer, contributing to the needs of the saints, practicing hospitality. I want you to go back because some of you are asleep right now, and I'm trying to wake you up, but I'm not doing real good. I want to go back and read verse 11 specifically again. In verse 11, not lagging behind in diligence. What do you think of when you hear the word diligence? The word in the Greek there is spoude. It is a word that means to be eager or to look forward to. Right? In other words, not lacking in eagerness or excitedness. Not lacking in excitedness. fervent in spirit, serving the Lord. Isn't it exciting? Out of all the things that are going on, isn't it exciting? You and I are together today. Amen for that. I am excited. I got to hear your voices. Some of you are saying, I don't sing really well. Well, you can't tell when there's a bunch of us singing. It's okay. Don't worry about it. Maybe you're not the greatest singer. Neither am I. Tough crowd. Okay, that wasn't a good joke. Move on to the next one. But we should be excited that we get to be together and we get to hear each other sing to each other, singing praises to God together. We get to read God's Word together. And as Buddy mentioned, there are people in other places that would do anything to have access to the Bible and get to read it the way that we do. And doesn't that make you really think about where we're at and how we take things for granted sometimes? You know what I mean? We have the Bible. I have my iPad that I use now most of the time, and I carry it with me everywhere in my phone, and I have access to God's Word wherever I want it. And so there's just things that we take for granted. But as you look at a child, they get excited, and they'll get excited about really nothing. But you and I have something to be excited about, and that is our faith. Some of you have made leaps and bounds in your faith, and I applaud you for that. I am so thankful for you. Some of our kids in our youth group have made strides that you would not believe, and there is nothing in the world more exciting than that for me. I love getting to see that. We have a reason to be excited. So the excitedness of children. Another characteristic that so badly, this is one right here, this is a big one, is their ability to forgive. So think about this for a second. I have seen this. I know you've seen this so many times. Okay? Kids will be playing on the playground. They get mad at each other. Maybe they throw rocks in each other's face. They get mad. They swing at each other a time or two, whatever. Mom comes in and picks them up and they're spanking him, and you don't do that. You don't act like that. It's not 3 minutes later and those same two kids are playing together again, and they pretend nothing has ever happened, right? And they're fine again. They're playing again. They forget about it. Right? Or how about this? How about as a parent, I can't relate to this one yet, but I can remember that time for me. Your kid does something, you discipline them, you spank their butt, and you're within minutes, maybe even seconds, you are the one person in the world that they want to see at that moment. I love you, Mom, so much. I love you, Dad, so much, right? Even after you've just blistered them. Why is that? Children just have this ability to forgive that we as adults typically don't. They tend to let go of things almost immediately, really. They let go of them so easily and so quickly. And you and I tend to hold on to them. We tend to let it stew. And the more we think about it, the madder we get. And the madder we get, and the more we separate ourselves from whoever or whatever it is that we feel did us wrong, and we just get madder and madder. As I think about my Lord, and this is always a thought that we go back to, as I think about my Lord and who He was, His whole purpose in coming to the earth was to do what? Was to seek, save the lost, right? To establish His kingdom, to establish this thing called the church, to die for it, to die for you and I. And the fact that my Lord, after the whole Barabbas experience, after taking the place, we skip right over that part. After He's already taken the place of a real criminal and is dying a criminal's death, as He's up there, the very people that put Him up there, and what does He say? He cries out to God and He says what? Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. How powerful is that? The very people that put Him on the cross, that He is suffering, the very people that He came to die for, have put Him on a cross and are mocking Him and disrespecting Him. And He says, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. As we've mentioned, you and I, we're not so good at this thing called forgiveness. Our feelings get hurt. And I want to make this point also. I want you to know that sometimes, I'm not saying that you're not justified in being upset with someone. I'm not saying that people don't really do you wrong and that doesn't really happen. No, we know that's not really the case. Sometimes people do things that they shouldn't, don't they? They do. It's just the nature of the world. That's what happens when Satan gets in the mind of someone. People do what they should never do. And sometimes they hurt you. They hurt your feelings. They hurt your trust. But if my Lord can sit on a cross and he can say, Father, forgive them, surely to goodness I can find it in my heart to surrender something to God and to say, God, help me to move on from this. And surely to goodness I can forgive them. You have bitterness in your heart? I mean, right now, as you're sitting there listening to the sermon, do you have bitterness in your heart right now? Towards someone, towards something? Has someone wronged you and it's just the hardest thing ever to forgive them? Because how do we justify, brethren? We say something like this, they don't deserve my forgiveness, right? That's how we look at that. You have bitterness, anger, hurt in your heart. I know it's an easy thing to do. You know, now's a really good time to become like a child. Now's a really good time to imitate that behavior and saying, it's over with. I let it go. I forgive whoever it is. We should imitate the heart of a child, its purity, its innocence. We should imitate their excitedness. It doesn't take much to get them excited. We should imitate their ability to forgive. And I want to close out on this one, and you will really like this one. Their inability to keep quiet. Amen, Chase. Right? Some of you are saying, I have had that problem just this morning. I'm sitting here right now as you are preaching, and my kid is not wanting to be quiet, right? This is such a practical thing, right? I remember being a kid, and I can remember my church experience. I can remember my mom never let me have toys in church. That was just something she didn't want us to do, okay? And I can remember sitting there in the pew, sitting straight up correct, scared to put a finger out of line. And I can remember having headaches after church from being still and quiet so long, or at least that's what I convinced myself it was from. By the way, that kind of carried over into adulthood. I still like to talk and make a lot of noise. That's just side note. But kids have this really big problem where they don't like to be quiet. Specifically when you want them to be quiet, right? It seems like it's always a prayer or some really quiet time when they want to act up, which you just love, I know. Kids just have this inability to keep quiet. In Acts chapter 4, starting in verse 18, it says this, and when they had summoned them, they commanded them not to speak or teach at all in the name of Jesus. Brethren, this may seem like this is a far-off idea, but it may not be very long before you and I are experiencing something similar to that. A time when people are saying you really shouldn't be teaching, you shouldn't be out there with your faith teaching people. It's coming probably quicker than you and I would like to realize. When they had summoned them, they commanded them not to speak or teach at all in the name of Jesus. But Peter and John answered and said to them, whether it is right in the sight of God to listen to you rather than to God, make your own judgment. Then verse 20. For we cannot stop speaking about what we have seen and heard. Sometimes with children, no matter how many times you tell them to be quiet, they don't do it. And then you are wrestling with, what do I do? How do I get them quiet? And sometimes the only answer is you take them out the back door, you take them somewhere, in one of these classrooms, and you try to quiet them down. That seems to be the only solution. Isn't it a really cool thought that people who have just been disciplined, they've just been disciplined for their teaching and speaking of Jesus, and they say, I'll tell you what, don't you do that again. Don't you do it. Slap on the wrist. Do not talk about Jesus. And what do they say? We can't stop. We won't stop. It's never going to happen. Amen to that. So that we would get to a point where people say, you shouldn't really talk about, whatever. And we say, no, I'm going to talk about Jesus because I can't help it. He's my life. He's my everything. You know one of the most powerful evangelistic tools that we have? Rather than sharing with people what Christ could do for them, maybe we sit down and we share with them what He has done for us personally. You ever thought about it like that? Rather than saying, this is what Jesus can do for you, kind of like a little infomercial, right? Rather than approaching it that way and saying, this is what Jesus can do for you. You should take advantage of this. Why don't you say, I'll tell you what, rather than that, this is what Jesus has done for me. He cleaned up my heart. He cleaned up my mind. He gave me a family that loves the Lord. and we love each other. We love being together. He gave me a job where I get to talk to people about Him all day long. He gave me this. He gave me that. He gives me peace. He gives me comfort. He gives me abundance. He gives me. He gives me. He gives me. And then maybe they say, you know what? I think I want that for myself. I think I want a piece of that action. That we would get to a point, my goodness, can you imagine if the church got to the point where it said, I don't want to be silent anymore. I want to take this beyond the walls, beyond the doors of the church building. I want to go tell every person everywhere about Jesus. Brethren, you ever thought for a second that maybe the number problem that we seem to be having could be extinguished if maybe we became more apt to share our faith? Have you had that thought yet? I have that thought all the time. Maybe rather than saying, oh, everyone will come back. Every person that's gone, they're coming back. Brethren, I want that just as badly as you. I cannot tell you how badly I want that. But brethren, the reality is there are probably, realistically, people that aren't coming back. Because when you separate yourself from Jesus for so long, it makes it really hard to come back. I hope that I'm wrong, by the way. I so badly want to be wrong. I hope that 6 months from now, I'm thinking, okay, whew, I'm glad I was wrong. I'm glad that they came back. I hope that happens. But brethren, realistically, that's not my expectation. I mean, we're talking about a couple of years here now. Realistically, the only way that we're going to get back to where you and I want to be is if we get really, really excited and we get really, really serious about going and sharing Jesus with people. In Luke chapter 19, go ahead and turn there with me. In Luke chapter 19, starting in verse 37, it says this. And as soon as he was approaching, near the descent of the Mount of Olives, the whole crowd, notice this, the whole crowd of the disciples began to praise God joyfully with a loud voice for all the miracles which they had seen, shouting, Blessed is the King, the one who comes in the name of the Lord, peace in heaven and glory in the highest. And yet some of the Pharisees in the crowd said to him, Teacher, rebuke your disciples. And what does Jesus say in verse 40? Jesus replied, I tell you, if these stop speaking, the stones will cry out. Jesus is King. I believe that with every part of my being. Jesus is King. He still is, right now. He's Lord. He's King. He's Savior. He's Redeemer. Chances are, every single day, for so many of us, now not all of us, chances are every single day we come into contact with people. Every single day, we probably come into contact with someone who does not know Jesus. I shared this study with you, maybe it was even last Sunday night, a study that was done by 21st Century Christian that estimates that only 1.1 million people in the United States are members of the Lord's church. 1.1 million, and if that is even a true estimate, if that is correct, then that would mean that there's 300 and some odd million people who aren't. Does that not scare you? Does that not make you think, what went wrong? We have the greatest story ever told at our disposal. Maybe you're saying, I'm not a good teacher. You don't have to be a good teacher. I'm going to tell you what, I don't consider myself a really good teacher either. I don't always say the right things. You've probably noticed that from listening to me preach for a while now. I don't always say things so elegantly. I stumble in my speech sometimes. I'm not the greatest speaker that ever walked the planet. But brethren, here's what I know. God has promised me if I will just be excited and sincere and serious about sharing my faith, God is going to give me success in that endeavor. Amen? I believe that with all of my heart. Maybe you're not a good teacher. That's okay. You don't have to be a great teacher. You don't have to know the Bible inside out, backwards, whatever. You don't have to be a scholar. Brethren, all it takes is someone that says, I love Jesus and I love people way too much to keep this message to myself. I want to share it with others. Man, kids have a hard time being quiet. They really do. I know that I was probably the worst of all of them, but man, wouldn't it be cool if you and I became children in that aspect and we could not keep quiet, no matter how many times we get rejected? You ever notice that Jesus didn't reach every single person that he talked to? You ever notice that? There were times when Jesus would speak to people and they didn't want anything to do with his teaching. It just wasn't enough for them. You're going to be rejected. I'll tell you this much right now. Not every single person you reach out to is going to come to Christ realistically. But think about this. If every 100 people you talk to, you reach one person, and over the course of the next few years you reach out to 1,000 people, you can do the math on that. And if every single one of us do that, you see how that begins to stack up really quickly. If you yourself right here today said, you know what, I'm going to make it my goal. I don't want you to set unrealistic goals. Maybe you set a goal and you say in 2022, I'm going to reach one person. Just one person in 2022. I'm going to put all my eggs in one basket. I'm going to reach one person in 2022. If 135 people, split that in half, okay? Split that in half. Say we have 80-something people. Say we have 70-something people, 60-something people, 40-something, whatever you want to say. If 30 people are touched this morning and leave with this message and say, I'm going to lead one person to Christ in 2022, then guess what we now have? We have 30 or 40 or however many people, more people that have just come to Jesus and their life has been changed. You see how this can add up really, really quickly? We approach it as if it cannot happen, and it will not if we have the mindset of it cannot. Make it your goal to reach someone. Church, I firmly believe that a lot of the reason for so many of the problems that we're encountering today is because for so long the church was silent. And because we didn't do exactly what God said to do. If we will just become like children, if we will have hearts that are pure and innocent, if we will have their excitedness, if we will have their inability to keep quiet, we will be exactly who God wants us to be. And if we have their ability to forgive, where that will take us, you just have no idea. Brethren, I appreciate your time this morning so much. Become like children this week, okay? And this month, let's be more like children. If you need prayers of any kind, please let us know how we can pray for you. If you are wanting to respond to the gospel message and become a believer and you want to be baptized into Christ, we can take care of that as well. Let us know how we can help you. Please come if you need something as we stand and sing.